So I was born in London and on the 12th of February. My older sister Sasha's birthday present. She was also born on the 12th of February 2 years earlier, so not sure if that was really great for her, but anyway, that's what happened. Grew up in London. My only school that I ever went to was a French lycée in London. I went from the age of 4 to 18. The reason my sisters and I went to a French school is because my father is Greek and my mother's English. And there wasn't a Greek school in London, and this was a good school. They thought it would be good if we were bilingual. My Greek grandparents spoke French. So if we didn't speak Greek, then at least we could speak French to them. I would have loved to have gone to an English school with a uniform, but now I had to go to the French school. But in the end, it was good. I did not enjoy it at the time. I'm not a natural linguist. Growing up, we lived in an apartment in London. From a very young age, like many children, I was obsessed with animals, but not just animals, also plants. And I was probably about 7 or 8 when my mother agreed that I could have a window box. So that was my first experience with plants, and I loved it. I just really enjoyed nurturing them and watering them and watching them grow. And if something actually got a flower on it, so much the better. So I've always been very interested in plants and animals, even though I grew up in London where we have parks, but we didn't have a garden or anything like that. Later on, I applied to do agricultural economics at university. Following my university degree, I went to work in Africa. So my first job after university was in the Ministry of Agriculture in Malawi. It was through VSO, which is the equivalent to the Peace Corps, Voluntary Service Overseas. I went for 2 years. I had 2 suitcases, and thinking that I would only be back in the UK after 2 years with 2 suitcases. You just go and that's it. And I worked in a department where I was the only expatriate. It was the first time they'd had an expatriate come and work in the agroeconomic survey department. And I got to travel everywhere in the country in a ropey old Land Rover, talking to farmers. We weren't dealing with large-scale agriculture. We were trying to help small farmers improve their processes so that they could have higher yields. And my role in it, we were carrying out surveys. So we were trying to find out what they were doing. But of course, from my side of it, I got to see small villages, really seeing how the people in an extremely poor country were living and growing their food, it was just an incredible experience. And then, of course, living in Africa, you find out that the birds that you think are pretty cool in England are really not, because you have sunbirds and hoopoes and just beautiful birds all around you, even in the city, Lilongwe, where I was. Actually, I met Lawrence, my husband, in the Ministry of Agriculture. I'd been there about 18 months, and he'd recently come, having previously been in Botswana. And our first real date was climbing a mountain, Mount Mulanje, in the south of Malawi. Then Lawrence got a job on St. Helena Island, which is this tiny 47 square miles speck of an island in the middle of the South Atlantic with no airport. And we weren't married then, and he asked me to join him. I could have gone on to do a master's degree. I had the funding and I had been accepted, and I decided not to do that, but to go out to St. Helena. And I think that was the right decision. And I actually got to work then also in the Department of Agriculture on the island, which was a completely different setup. But again, I was doing statistics and data gathering and learning about what they were doing there and seeing if there was anything that I knew that could be done to help people there. And actually that's where our first child, Emily, was born. She was born on St. Helena. We had got married before then. I joined him on St. Helena, and he proposed to me. We went back, we got married in England, and then we came back to St. Helena. and Emily was born on the island. I moved to Swaziland when Emily was about 9 months old. And again, another rented house and another garden to work on. Swaziland has the most amazing climate, so anything grows. It's beautiful, warm weather all the year round, and we had a fantastic time there. And that's where our second child was born, Nick. He was born in 1992. My husband actually grew up in Africa. He was born in Tanzania. His parents both English, but his father was working for the British Council there as a teacher. And part of the reason that I did agricultural economics was so that I could work overseas. My father had worked in Tunisia. My younger sister was born in Tunisia. So I was there when I was very little, and then he'd worked in Algeria in my early teen years. We went there in the summers to visit there. So I knew I wanted to work somehow with plants and animals, and I knew I also wanted to not do that in England. So double backing a little bit, but that was both of our focuses, to work overseas. Lawrence was offered a job with the World Bank Group with IFC here in Washington, D.C. And we had met many Americans in Africa through the Peace Corps, through USAID and other places. We thought it might be interesting for a little bit to see what they're like on in their own country. And so we decided to move here with the idea that we'd come here for 2 or 3 years. That was in 1993. And we're still here 20 years plus later. I came in September of 1993. So Nick was 9 months old, 10 months old, and Emily was just shy of her 3rd birthday. And we put our 2 children, well, Emily to start off with, at the French lycée. So we put them in the French school so that our children would be bilingual as well, because it had been so useful to me, despite the fact I didn't really want to learn French when I was a child. I would have preferred to have gone to an English school. It was very useful, and it certainly makes it easier to learn other languages if you've got a base of at least 2. So I learned Chichewa in Malawi, and I learned a little bit of Siswati in Swaziland. And it's definitely easier if you have a second language. So we wanted to give our children that advantage. When we first came to America, I was very keen on having a proper job, as in one which was relevant to the degree that I had and my work experience. And I did indeed work a little bit at the World Bank, but I had 2 children, and I absolutely did not want to work full-time. I was determined to be at home at every point when they needed me. So I didn't do that for very long. I did it actually right up until 1996, when Georgie, our last child, second daughter, was born. She was born in March 1996 in Washington, D.C. And so I worked at the World Bank till just before she was born. I then focused much more on the children. So I started off with doing things as most people do at the kids' schools. But I guess really with volunteering, it came into its own after the next interval in our life, which was spent in Poland. In 2001, we decided that our children had experienced too much affluence, and we needed to go somewhere else. So we looked at what possible places Lawrence could go and work, and Warsaw came up. So we moved to Poland in 2001, uprooted the kids. I started a master's degree in environmental management. I did it entirely by correspondence. They didn't have internet-based courses at that time, so it was document-based. And I started it there, and I finished it here, and I got my my master's a few years later in environmental management. So when I came back here, it gave me a new focus for my volunteer work. I did water quality monitoring, which was really interesting. You're standing around in streams and scooping up benthic macroinvertebrates and counting the different species and the different numbers that you get with a very precise protocol to make sure that you're doing the same in a stream up in Burtonsville that people are doing in Chevy Chase or elsewhere, to see the impacts of development on stream health. So that was really interesting. I did that for a while. And I also started volunteering at the zoo, which I started in 2005, and I'm still doing now in Amazonia, which is just absolutely fantastic. I spend, now I have 2 3-hour periods each month, where I spend educating people into issues affecting the Amazon. Of course, people are going to the zoo to enjoy the animals, but I take it upon myself to educate them in a little bit of a broader way, showing the impact of human beings on the Amazon. And I hope that some of the kids take it in. The kids love the animals. They love the 8-foot-long arapaima. They love the freshwater stingrays and the Geldian titi monkeys, which jump around overhead. And these are spectacular, special things. And in Amazonia, we're lucky to have a little mini jungle up there. So we've got trees and plants and the animals and birds, amphibians and others flying around. So it's a fantastic tool for educating people about what we have around us and what we should not take for granted. And having lived in Africa, having lived in Poland, where the standard of living is not nearly as high as it is here, having seen people with a bicycle ploughing ground in Poland, or maybe with a horse, and by hand in Africa, you know how valuable the environment is, and people need to really think about how they are impacting it, whether it's through your choices of supporting local agriculture through a CSA, community-supported agriculture, or whether it's not using pesticides, or whether it's choosing to drive a Prius, like we have, my very nice new car. These are choices that people can make, and I think a lot of people make choices based on non-environmental issues. Well, not in my case. I like to try and walk the walk rather than just talking the talk. So I do that too. I try and tell people in a nice enough way. I try not to be too preachy about it. Probably sometimes I don't succeed and I come off as preachy. But I try and act in a responsible way as well. And if there's anything I can do to influence people to do that. My kids especially. In the next year or so, then I want to do that. So it's a little hard for me to think about not being able to give my children the advice I want to give them. In times when normally I should be there. But I think over the years they probably know what I think is the right approach. And of course it's up to everybody. We're all individuals. Everybody can do whatever they want. But if I can influence at least my kids, then I'll do so.